welcome back to World of Skimmer and World of Skimmer podcast, a podcast where we delve deeply into the Skimmer book series that I wrote, consisting of currently Skimmer Deep Sea, Skimmer Harvest and Skimmer Mine. So 3 books have been published by my UK publisher Austin Macaulay, and this year we're going to have the 4th one coming out very soon. So it's a good time to start this podcast and dive into how this world has evolved around amongst the backdrop of deep sea mining, or the deep sea mining industry set in 2040. So it's quite exciting to be delivering this to you guys. And what I thought today is we'd talk about some of the characters. One in particular we'll focus on in this session through the book series, and that is a guy called Rick. Now he runs the crew monitoring program at XZ Ocean Academy. So he's one of the top people in the academy. There's him and another lady called Jonah. Jonah's a founding member. We'll talk more about her in due course. But Rick came along and got seconded into the academy into quite a senior role, running this crew monitoring program for the subsurface mining skiffs, or Skimmers. Now that was mainly because, like in book 2 for example, you find out that he's somehow connected with or involved in the retrofitted overdrives on the Skimmers. In book 1, we kind of get to know Rick as being quite obtuse and quite blunt, but also with great concern over the future of the academy and the Skimmer crew program, mainly because of what he sees as undue influence by the Chinese company, or global mining company, Globcorp Mining, which runs the big mineral harvester out in the area that these subsurface mining skiffs deliver manganese nodules to, or polymetallic nodules. Now they, of course, fund the crew monitoring program to man the Skimmers for contractors, and without that funding, XZ Ocean Academy probably couldn't run the Skimmer crew training program and complex there, which includes a couple of large simulators of Skimmers and their subsurface mining operations using drones. So they're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place with the funding program, and Rick comes at it with an angle or a concern about the impact of that on national security arrangements. Now that's because Rick is ex-military and well connected in intelligence circles, and so he has a real concern about undue influence on the crew monitoring program, particularly because of the overdrives. Now there is an agreement with the Chinese that they can't touch the overdrives on the Skimmers, but Rick doesn't really trust that arrangement and quite often goes head to head with Jonah, whose only concern is the safety and well-being of the crew, whereas Rick is more focused on the operations and adoption and use of technology, including high technology, which is the overdrives. So Rick's ex-military, quite tied up in intelligence, was involved in the Wave Glider program for Australia for maritime operations, security, surveillance and intelligence monitoring. Now remember, this is set in 2040, so a lot has happened between now and then, and one of the things he's got himself tied up into is alternate energy systems or propulsion systems for civilian and military assets, and that includes the overdrive installation on the subsurface Skimmers to supplement or take control of the Skimmer using advanced or very advanced high technology. And as I pointed out in a previous podcast, we don't really know where this retrofitted overdrive has come from, because it's an inertial mass reduction drive. And as I said, there's another book that precedes the series where we learn about how that came to be, in terms of what I would call crash recovery operations out in the ocean, that they stumbled across this alternate propulsion system and eventually figured out its use and wanted to trial it in these skimmers. So Rick came on board. Jonah is never really fully aware of exactly what's going on, and so there's always that confrontation in terms of personality with Rick. But she is aware that there is an overdrive program, and there was an agreement made that they would trial these overdrives on these skimmers, which were perfectly set up to incorporate them. So one wonders whether, when these skimmers were originally designed, with this void space below the side console, that the intention was to stick some sort of alternate propulsion system in there with shielding, and we don't really know or understand if that was the case, and we won't know until I write the prelude to the series and talk more about how Rick came to be involved in all this. But what we do know is that there is a Project Cygnus, right? And Project Cygnus is always talked about, especially once you get into book 3 and 4, and no one seems to quite know what it is, but the crew of the Skimmers is briefed on it, and the communications and security officer on each skimmer is well aware that they have to meet the obligations for running the overdrive trials through to completion. Now what changes the game is the rise of AI, of course, with Connor on the skimmer discovering a way to fully automate the subsurface mining drones and make them learn by themselves, and then that's set up against the Chinese version of an AI that they are trying to roll out, which has a different focus. Now that's a separate conversation to get into about how all that works, so I don't really want to do that now, but I do want to talk more about the Project Cygnus, because Rick uses that term a lot, and he always refers to my people and his agenda having to be met under an agreement made with Exceed Ocean Academy about finishing these overdrive trials. But because the AI takes off and they take advantage of the situation, Rick is told by his people that he has to move forward the plans to complete the overdrive trials and the last stage of Project Cygnus. And of course the crew keeps asking, so what is Project Cygnus? You keep saying Project Cygnus, but what is it? What is it? And then no one really knows, and we find out finally in book 6, the last one in the series, what Project Cygnus actually is. And I'm leaving that surprise for the novel, because it's right there under your noses the whole time, and I don't really want to go into too much detail. The reader will figure that out themselves, as well as the connections he has with his people and coming across this inertial mass reduction drive. So this sets up a whole character dynamic between Jonah and Rick, in terms of communications and security officers as well, because their mandate on the Skimmers is to monitor the well-being and safety, both psychologically and operationally, of the skimmer by the crew. So it's the crew's well-being as well as security, and that includes secrecy and intelligence and being careful about how much the crew actually knows about where they're going and what they're doing. The less the better. So for example, mining coordinates are always given out at the last minute to avoid any conflict or confrontation with pirates or dissemination of information about the location. But once the overdrive is installed, of course they jump between coordinates, so the pirates are much less likely to come across skimmers and track them. But of course, the rollout of the technology, the Chinese become much more aware that there is the potential to revolutionise mining operations because of the combination of two AIs with this overdrive. And although the agreement was there that the overdrive is not to be touched, there is another agenda going on. And Rick at Ocean Academy, now he's the one that doesn't trust everyone at face value, and he thinks there's always another agenda, and he becomes certain that somehow the PLA Navy is tied up in an alternate agenda to undermine Project Cygnus and take control. And we learn about that particularly once we get into book 5, but especially in book 6, where everything comes to a head, and we learn that what's going on and what the connection is between the PLA Navy, a woman called Sue who's quite senior in Globecourt mining, but probably a plant by the PLA Navy, but for some reason there's a family connection with Sue between the Chief Operations Officer and his family members that are in Globecourt mining and also at Exeter Ocean Academy crewing one of the Skimmers. And Rick doesn't like this. Rick sees this as a big blaring national security risk. One, to have a personal relationship with Jonah at Exeter Ocean Academy, to have Globecourt Mining COO's son on a skimmer where this AI technology is being developed, and to have his daughter, I think I said his sister in a previous podcast, but it's actually his daughter, as a senior scientist or lab tech for Globecourt Mining, all tied up in this. So that's where Rick's concerns come in. Now he carries on escalating his concern about this through the novel series and becoming quite confrontational through book 4 and especially into book 5, and Jonah really hits him up about this and wants to know the truth of the situation, and he does start to say eventually what is actually going on, but only out of necessity and need. If that wasn't the case, he wouldn't be saying that, but he's sort of forced into that situation because of the completion of the overdrive trials to get the Skimmers to where they are meant to be. And of course, I mean, as a hint around the plot, we're talking about mining, about deep sea mining, and about critical minerals. So think about that when you get into book 4, 5 and 6, and what the ultimate end game is, and why Project Cygnus is so important. Because it's not what you think it is. It may seem like a cumbersome agenda to have autonomous drones in a subsurface mining skiff fitted or retrofitted with inertial mass reduction drive, but there's a bigger agenda going on, and we come to the conclusion that the PLA Navy has kind of figured out what is going on through Sue. What we're still not sure of is whether Sue is actually a rogue or acting for a group in the PLA Navy, and that's what Rick's growing concern is, and his rush to complete the overdrive trials, why that is so important. So I will wrap it up there with Rick and his role in all this, and in subsequent podcasts we will go through a lot of the other main characters. There is so much to talk about in this world, and we will get through them over many podcasts, and I'm hoping there will be a lot of questions generated through the viewers. So without further ado, I will leave it at there, and we will see you very soon for World of Skimmers.